All of us are, I think, familiar with the footage of Japanese kamikaze pilots, those grim images of aircraft plunging into US and British ships off Okinawa in 1945. To many, this act of self-sacrifice seems like a uniquely Japanese phenomenon. Born from a nation that viewed surrender as the ultimate shame and death in battle as the highest expression of loyalty to both one's country and to the divine emperor himself. Surely no other modern nation could have embraced such a shocking and barbaric tradition, right? Well, in fact, there was one. Nazi Germany. The idea of using volunteer pilots for missions that would almost certainly end in their own deaths did not appear only in the final desperate months of World War II. In truth, the seeds of what the Germans called total missions had been planted long before the D-Day landings in 1944. The first proposal came in February 1944 from two men, SS Obersturmbannführer Otto Skorzeny, the legendary commander who had rescued the deposed Italian dictator Benito Mussolini from captivity atop the Gran Sasso mountain the previous year, and Oberst Hajo Hermann, a highly decorated Luftwaffe officer and Inspector General of night fighters. Both men believed that the Luftwaffe's dwindling numbers could be offset by the extreme devotion of its pilots. Hermann, in particular, advocated for ramming enemy bombers mid-air, sacrificing one plane to take down another. It was a grim but logical calculation for a country running out of both aircraft and fuel. Their idea was that the Reich could tap into the same kind of fanatical heroism that Nazi propaganda so often glorified, pilots willing to give their lives for the fatherland and their Führer. Incredibly, young men did volunteer for such missions, and perhaps even more astonishing, it was a woman who persuaded a skeptical Adolf Hitler to give the concept a chance. Her name was Hanna Reich, Germany's most famous test pilot and much admired by Hitler. Fearless, talented, and utterly devoted to National Socialism, Reich was one of only 3 women ever awarded the Iron Cross First Class, and the only one to receive the Pilot Observer's badge in gold with diamonds. Earlier in her career, she had tested the Junkers Ju-87 Stuka dive bomber, the Dornier Do-17, and later the dangerous Messerschmitt Me-163 Comet, a rocket-powered interceptor that often exploded on takeoff or landing. Reich somehow survived several of those harrowing tests. She believed that suicide attacks could prove invaluable against Allied shipping, much like the Japanese kamikaze tactics being employed in the Pacific. Looking for a suitable aircraft, Reich suggested the Messerschmitt Me 328, a small and inexpensive jet-powered escort fighter designed to be towed aloft, released, and then used 2 pulse jets, similar to those of the V-1 flying bomb, to attack enemy bombers. However, the pulse jets proved unreliable at high altitudes and the concept stalled. Still, Reich had personally flown the glider version of the Me-328, carrying a 2,000-pound bomb beneath its fuselage, intended to silently dive into enemy ships. 9 of these aircraft were built, though none ever saw combat. Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler supported Reich's plan, but the Luftwaffe High Command remained skeptical. Even Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe, showed little interest. Yet on February 28, 1944, Hanna Reich met with Hitler at his private mountain retreat, the Berghof in Bavaria, and personally presented her proposal, Operation Suicide. At first, Hitler dismissed the idea, insisting that Germany's situation wasn't desperate enough to require such extreme measures. But Reich, confident and persuasive, won him over. Hitler gave tentative approval and passed the project to General Günther Korten, chief of the Luftwaffe General Staff. The new unit was christened the Leonidas Squadron, named after King Leonidas I of Sparta, who with just 300 men had held the pass at Thermopylae against a massive Persian army in 480 BC, fighting to the last man. For administrative purposes, the Leonidas Squadron was placed under Kampfgeschwader 200, the Luftwaffe's shadowy Special Operations Wing responsible for espionage, testing captured enemy aircraft and other secret missions. 70 volunteers joined the squadron. Each signed a declaration stating, "I hereby voluntarily apply to be involved in the group as part of a human glider bomb. I fully understand that employment in this capacity will entail my own death." At this point, the Me-328 project was dropped in favour of a new design, a manned version of the V-1 flying bomb, designated Phi-103R or Reichenberg. The name came from the capital of the former Czech territory of the Sudetenland, Reichenberg, annexed by Germany in 1938. The standard Phi-1, of course, was an unmanned robot bomb, as the British called it. The Reichenberg modification added a small enclosed cockpit with an armoured front plate and reinforced wings designed to slice through the cables of defensive barrage balloons. The Reichenberg would be carried aloft by a Heinkel He-111 bomber, then released near its target. The pilot would guide it in, aiming directly at enemy ships or fortifications, and at the very last second bail out. In theory, at least. In practice, the odds of survival were grim. The cockpit sat just inches from the roaring pulse jet intake, which made bailing out almost impossible. Later calculations estimated the chances of a pilot escaping alive at less than 1%. Manned glider versions were tested first to give volunteers some flight experience. The first powered test occurred at Rechlin Air Base in September 1944, but the aircraft crashed after the pilot accidentally jettisoned the canopy mid-flight. Despite these failures, Hannah Reich continued to test the aircraft herself, surviving multiple crash landings. But the commander of KG-200, Lieutenant Colonel Werner Baumbach, was firmly opposed to the project. By October 1944, Baumbach succeeded in shelving the Reichenberg program, despite 175 units already being built, in favour of another experimental weapon, the Mistel project. Mistel, meaning mistletoe, was not a suicide weapon, but rather a composite aircraft, two planes joined together. A Focke-Wulf FW-190 fighter would sit atop a Junkers Ju-88 bomber packed with explosives. The pilot would guide the combined aircraft toward a target, release the bomber component, and then escape in the fighter before impact. The concept worked, at least in theory, and several Mistels saw action on both the Eastern and Western fronts in 1945, but their results were minimal, and they were highly vulnerable to Allied fighters. Still, their existence meant that the Leonidas Squadron's volunteers were suddenly obsolete, until, that is, the dying days of the war. As the Battle of Berlin began, the Leonidas Squadron was stationed at Jüterbog airfield south of the capital. Their new orders were desperate ones: destroy bridges over the Oder River that had fallen into Soviet hands. Between April 17th and 20th, 1945, 35 one-way missions were flown. The pilots used whatever aircraft were available, mostly Messerschmitt Bf-19s and Focke-Wulf FW-190S, converted into makeshift suicide planes. The Luftwaffe later claimed that 17 bridges were destroyed. In truth, only one, the railway bridge at Kustrin, was confirmed to have been successfully brought down. 35 German pilots died in the horrid operation. Their sacrifice achieved little beyond a brief disruption of the Soviet advance. By April 20th, 1945, the Red Army was closing in on Jüterbog itself, and the Leonidas Squadron ceased operations. You may recall earlier I mentioned Colonel Hajo Hermann, one of the original architects of Germany's suicide mission concept. His idea of ramming enemy bombers was eventually revived under another late-war operation, Sonderkommando Elbe, a semi-suicidal ramming unit that sought to bring down Allied bombers through direct collision. But that's a story for another episode. In the end, The Leonidas Squadron stands as one of the most bizarre and desperate experiments of the Third Reich, an eerie mirror to the Japanese Kamikaze program. Both born from hopelessness, both a testament to the same grim conclusion, that in the final days of war, ideology often demands more than life itself. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing for more in-depth World War II documentaries. Don't forget to leave a like and share it with fellow history enthusiasts. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.